I never believed grief could feel like an execution until the day we buried my grandfather. The cemetery outside Hartford, Connecticut was soaked in cold rain, the kind that seeps through black coats and settles into your bones. Umbrellas dotted the grounds like bruises. I stood there motionless as the casket lowered, watching the only man who had ever truly seen me disappear into the earth. He was my mentor, my anchor, the one person who told me I mattered. Behind me, my father didn't cry. He shook hands. I watched him work the crowd like it was a corporate mixer, his smile sharp, controlled, polished. My half-brother hovered at his side, expensive suit, smug expression, already rehearsing the life he assumed was guaranteed. They barely spared the grave a glance. That should have warned me. Later that night, we gathered in a downtown law office, dark wood walls and dim lamps humming with tension. The air smelled like dust and ambition. I sat straight-backed, hands clenched, replaying every promise my grandfather had ever made me. How he said I'd one day protect what he built. How legacy wasn't about blood alone, but integrity. The attorney cleared his throat. "There's no will." The words echoed like a gunshot. My father turned slowly toward me, lips curling into something cruel and satisfied. He leaned in close enough that only I could hear him. "You don't get a dime," he whispered. "My son takes everything." My brother grinned, tapping a gold pen against the desk like a countdown. I felt myself shrink. Not because of the money, but because of the way my father looked at me. Like I was excess, a mistake he'd finally corrected. No one defended me. No one even met my eyes. That night, I walked the city streets until my feet ached, rain streaking down my face, mixing with tears I refused to acknowledge. Every memory of my grandfather burned like salt in an open wound. I replayed his voice, his faith, his belief that I'd be strong enough. I didn't feel strong. I felt erased. Close to midnight, someone knocked on my apartment door, 3 sharp raps. I froze. When I opened it, my mother stood there, drenched, trembling, her eyes wild with fear. She didn't hug me, she didn't speak right away. She simply pressed a sealed envelope into my hands like it was a weapon, or a confession. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "It's time," she said, shaking, "for them to know who you really are." And in that moment I understood something terrifying. My grandfather's death wasn't the end of the story. It was the trigger. I didn't sleep that night. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, its wax seal catching the yellow light like an unblinking eye. I paced around it, heart hammering, replaying my mother's words again and again. "Who you really are." She'd left without another explanation, vanishing into the rain like she'd already said too much. Typical. My entire childhood, she'd survived by staying quiet, ducking under my father's temper, shrinking herself to avoid becoming a target. Whatever was inside that envelope had terrified her enough to break years of silence. That alone told me it was dangerous. At dawn, exhaustion finally pushed me forward. My hands shook as I broke the seal. The first thing I pulled out was a letter. I knew the handwriting instantly. My grandfather. The words blurred as my vision filled with tears. If you're reading this, it means I was right not to trust him. My chest tightened. He wrote that he'd seen what my father was becoming long before anyone else did. That greed had hollowed him out. That power mattered more to him than family. And then the sentence that made my breath catch, "You are my rightful heir." I made sure of it. I pressed the paper to my chest, sobbing silently. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd planned for this. Behind the letter was a legal document. Old, certified, stamped. A birth record. My name was there. My mother's name was there, but the line marked father was empty. Instead, there was an amendment, signed years later. My grandfather's name, legal recognition, bloodline acknowledgement. He hadn't just loved me like a daughter. He was my biological grandfather. My knees gave out. I sank into the chair, memories crashing together. My father's cold distance, his refusal to claim me, the way he'd always looked at me like I didn't quite belong. Because I didn't. I was proof of something he wanted buried. The final document was short but lethal. A signed statement declaring his intent for me to inherit everything if the will disappeared. A safeguard, a contingency, a bomb. Fear crept in alongside the relief. If my father found out I had this, he wouldn't just fight me in court, he'd destroy me. 2 days later, he summoned the family to the estate. A celebration, he said. I almost didn't go, but my grandfather's voice echoed in my head. Stand tall, so I dressed carefully, slid the envelope into my bag, and walked straight into the lion's den, knowing this time I wasn't empty-handed. And this time I wasn't invisible. The Moore estate looked exactly the same as it always had. White stone, iron gates, manicured hedges trimmed to perfection. Cold, untouchable. A place designed to intimidate anyone who walked inside. As soon as I entered, conversation slowed, heads turned, smiles stiffened. I felt it immediately, the shift, the unspoken understanding that I was no longer supposed to be here. My father stood near the fireplace, drink in hand, navy suit tailored to dominance. Beside him, my brother lounged like royalty, already comfortable in a throne he hadn't earned. "Didn't expect you," my father said calmly, eyes sharp. "This isn't exactly your world anymore." I ignored the jab and stepped farther into the room. Board members, relatives, executives. People who used to greet me warmly now avoided my gaze like association alone might cost them something. My father raised his glass. "Tonight marks a new chapter," he announced. "My son will officially step into leadership. The future of the company is secured." Applause followed, polite, automatic. My brother smiled wide, soaking it in. Something inside me snapped. "Before that happens," I said, my voice slicing through the noise, "there's something everyone deserves to hear." Silence fell hard. My father's smile didn't fade, but his eyes darkened. "Sit down," he warned quietly. "You're embarrassing yourself." I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope. Gasps rippled through the room. "What is that?" my brother asked, his confidence faltering for the first time. "Truth," I said. "The kind you've spent years burying." My father stepped forward. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied, hands shaking, but steady enough. I opened the letter and read my grandfather's words aloud. Every sentence landed heavier than the last. Faces shifted. Whispers spread. Power cracked. My father exploded. "This is nonsense," he barked, a pathetic attempt by a bitter girl who couldn't handle being left behind. I met his stare. "You never left me behind," I said quietly. "You erased me, because I reminded you of something you were afraid to face." My mother stood. For the first time in my life, she didn't sit back down. "She's telling the truth," she said, voice trembling but clear. "I stayed silent too long. Your father hid everything, and your grandfather knew it." The room erupted. I watched control slip from my father's hands, saw fear flash across his face for the first time ever. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore, it was war, and he knew he was losing ground. The gathering ended in chaos. People left in clusters, whispering behind raised hands, eyes darting between me and my father like they were watching a slow-motion car crash. No one congratulated my brother anymore. No one touched the champagne. Power had shifted, and everyone felt it. My father didn't say a word to me as they left. Not a threat, not an insult. That silence scared me more than his rage ever had. That night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "You've made a mistake." I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding in my ears. I didn't reply. Another message followed. "You don't know what you're playing with." I locked my door, checked the windows, slept with the lights on. The next morning, I met with an attorney recommended by a former executive. Someone my father had fired years ago for asking too many questions. He didn't smile when he read the documents. That told me everything. "This is strong," he said slowly. "But your father didn't get where he is by following rules. If he hit a will once, he'll do worse to keep control." "How much worse?" I asked. He leaned back. "People like him don't lose quietly." It didn't take long to prove him right. 2 nights later, a black sedan sat across the street from my apartment. Engine running, lights off. It was still there when I checked again an hour later. The next morning, a note was slipped under my door. 4 words, "Stop," before it's permanent. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about inheritance, it was about survival. I packed a bag and went to my mother's place. She cried when she saw the note, guilt etched into every line on her face. "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. "No," I said. "You told me when it mattered." Together, we decided to fight. Not loudly, not recklessly, but strategically. Because if my father wanted a war, I was done being his easiest target. The attorney didn't waste time. Within days, we were pulling records my father never expected anyone to touch. Old correspondence, archived contracts, financial transfers buried under shell accounts. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Then we found her. A retired legal secretary, nervous, quiet, forgotten. She agreed to meet us at a roadside diner an hour outside the city, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like regret. Her hands shook the entire time. "I saw the will," she whispered, eyes fixed on the table. "Your grandfather signed it. It was locked in the firm's safe." My heart slammed. "What happened to it?" I asked. Her voice dropped lower. "The day after he died, your father came in. He and the lawyer went into the back room alone. The next morning, the safe was empty." Everything clicked. The lies, the speed, the confidence. My father hadn't inherited anything. He'd stolen it. On the drive home, my phone rang again. Same unknown number. "You should have stayed quiet," the voice said this time. Calm, controlled, terrifyingly familiar. "I warned you." I hung up shaking. That night, I noticed the sedan again. Closer this time, I didn't sleep. Instead, I made a decision. If he wanted silence, I'd give him the opposite. We filed the case the next morning. Public, formal, unavoidable. The moment the paperwork hit the court, the threat stopped. That scared me even more, because I knew what it meant. He was done warning me, and whatever came next would be brutal. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Not physically, but emotionally. Like every secret ever buried was pressing in from the walls. My father sat across from me in a charcoal suit, flawless as ever. If you didn't know him, you'd think he was bored, mildly inconvenienced. A powerful man forced to attend something beneath him. But I knew that look. It was control under strain. My brother sat beside him, leg bouncing, jaw tight. He wouldn't meet my eyes, not once. When the judge entered, the room snapped to attention. The case was called. My name echoed through the chamber. heavier than it had ever sounded before. This was it. The attorney laid everything out. Documents, testimony, timelines. Calm, precise. Every word a slow tightening of the noose. Then the retired secretary took the stand. Her voice shook, but she didn't break. "I saw the will," she said. "It existed, it was signed, and it vanished after your father accessed the office." A murmur spread through the room. I watched my father closely. For the first time in my life, his jaw clenched. When it was his turn, he stood smoothly, adjusting his cuffs, wearing indignation like armor. "This is a witch hunt," he said confidently. "My daughter is confused, emotional. She was never meant to inherit anything." I stood before I realized I'd moved. "You never called me your daughter," I said, voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, "because I wasn't, and you hated that I reminded you of the truth." Silence, not even a breath. My mother stood from the gallery. "He destroyed the will," she said, "because Eugene trusted her, not him." That was the moment, the exact second. My father's mask cracked. Not completely, but enough. The judge ordered a criminal investigation, froze the estate, called for further hearings. Power drained out of him in real time. As officers stepped closer, his eyes locked onto mine. This wasn't over, but it wasn't his anymore either. For the first time in my life, I walked out of that room knowing something undeniable. I had survived him. The headlines hit 3 days later. Not the kind you could pay to bury. Prominent businessman under criminal investigation. Missing Will Sparks' fraud probe. Construction empire faces uncertain future. I read them alone in my mother's kitchen, coffee gone cold in my hands. Each article felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel on a screen. My father didn't call, neither did my brother. But his allies did. Executives resigned quietly. Contracts stalled. Banks requested clarification. The company my grandfather built brick by brick began to wobble under the weight of secrets my father had stacked for decades. Power hates exposure. It started eating itself. Then came the retaliation. Anonymous complaints against me. False claims questioning my mental stability. One blog even suggested I'd fabricated everything for attention. I recognized my father's playbook immediately. Discredit the source, poison the well. It didn't work. Too many eyes were watching now. The prosecutor called my attorney personally. The financial record sealed it. 2 large withdrawals timed perfectly around the will's disappearance and the threats I received. Payments with no legitimate explanation. My father was no longer untouchable. One evening, as I was leaving the courthouse, someone said my name. I turned. My brother stood there alone. No suit, no confidence, no smirk. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "Not the whole thing." I studied him. For years, I'd hated him for how easily he'd stepped into everything I'd lost. But now, stripped of our father's protection, he looked like what he really was. A pawn. "He told me you were unstable," he continued. "That Grandpa pitied you. I believed him." "I know," I said. Silence stretched between us. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said finally. "But I want out of him, of this." I nodded once. "Then you start from the truth." As he walked away, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not victory, relief. Because the empire wasn't just bleeding, it was finally being cleansed. The second hearing came faster than anyone expected. This time, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Investors sat stiff and pale. Former allies avoided my father's eyes like guilt was contagious. He walked in late, shoulders squared, still trying to project authority, but something was off. He looked smaller. The prosecution didn't waste time. They laid out the financial trail in brutal detail. Withdrawals, shell transfers, payments routed through intermediaries connected directly to the missing will and the intimidation attempts. Dates, amounts, names. Every lie finally had a timestamp. When the judge asked my father to explain the transactions, he hesitated, just for a second. But power like his survives on never hesitating. He spoke anyway, badly. His answers tangled, his temper flared. At one point, he snapped at the judge herself, an unthinkable mistake. I watched the moment it happened. The instant arrogance overpowered control. That was when I knew. He'd already lost. Then the lawyer, the one who'd helped him hide everything, took the stand. He didn't look at my father, not once. "I acted under pressure," he said, voice hollow. "I was told the will would destroy the family, that it had to disappear." "And who told you that?" the prosecutor asked. Silence. Then, "Richard." My father surged to his feet. "You coward," he hissed. "After everything." "Sit down," the judge barked. Security stepped closer. The ruling came down before noon. Criminal charges, fraud, will concealment, obstruction. My father didn't react at first. Then his eyes found mine, not angry, terrified. As officers approached, he leaned toward me, voice low and shaking. "You think this makes you strong," he whispered. "You've ruined everything." I met his gaze without flinching. "No," I said, "you did." They led him away. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. The man who once controlled every room he entered couldn't even control his own hands as they cuffed him. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just breathed. Because for the first time in my life, the shadow he cast was gone. The ruling didn't feel real at first. It arrived quietly, tucked into a legal notice, free of drama or cameras. A few pages of dense language that boiled down to one truth. The estate was mine. Not provisionally, not temporarily. Mine. I sat alone in my apartment, the same one where weeks earlier I'd stared at an envelope that changed everything. Sunlight poured through the windows, warm and ordinary, like the world hadn't just shifted under my feet. I expected to feel triumphant. I didn't. What I felt was grief. Cleaner this time. Honest. For the grandfather who had protected me, even in death. For the childhood I spent trying to earn love from a man who resented my existence. For the version of myself who believed silence was survival. The company headquarters reopened under my authority the following Monday. Walking through those doors again was surreal. The same marble floors, the same framed photos lining the walls. But the energy was different. Lighter, cautious, hopeful. People looked at me directly now, not with pity, with respect. I called a meeting that afternoon. No speeches, no theatrics, just truth. "This company was built on trust," I said. "That trust was broken. We're going to fix it, or we won't exist at all." No one argued. My brother requested a private meeting later that week. He looked nervous standing in my office, hands clasped, eyes down. "I don't want what he wanted," he said. "I just want a chance to earn something real." I studied him for a long moment. "You'll start at the bottom," I said. "No favors, no shortcuts." He nodded immediately. "I understand." For the first time, I believed him. That evening, I stood alone in the lobby, staring at my grandfather's portrait. His eyes were steady, kind, unyielding. "I kept my promise," I whispered. And for the first time, I felt like the ground beneath me truly belonged to me. The night everything finally ended, I returned to the cemetery alone. No cameras, no lawyers, no witnesses, just me and the quiet. The headstone was simple. His name, the years he lived, nothing flashy. That felt right, He never needed monuments. He built things meant to last, not things meant to impress. I knelt in the damp grass and let the silence settle into me. "They tried to erase you," I whispered. "They tried to erase me too." The wind moved through the trees like a breath. I told him everything. About the trial, about my father being led away in handcuffs, about the company, his company, finally being returned to the principles he taught me when I was still too young to understand how rare his kindness was. "I didn't win," I said softly. "I survived." And that mattered more. Weeks passed. The world moved on. Scandals faded. New headlines replaced old ones. My father's name became a cautionary footnote, an example of what happens when greed mistakes control for strength. I never visited him. Some doors don't deserve reopening. My mother moved out of the estate and into a small house near the water. She laughed more now, slept better, lived lighter. One evening, she hugged me and said, "I wish I'd been this brave sooner." "You were brave when it counted," I told her. At the company, things changed slowly, but honestly. No intimidation, no fear-based loyalty, just work, real work, the kind my grandfather respected. My brother kept his head down and did exactly what I told him to do. No complaints, no shortcuts. Redemption, I learned, isn't dramatic, it's consistent. One night, after the building emptied, I stood alone in my office and looked out over the city lights. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat silent in rooms where her future was decided without her. She didn't know yet that silence isn't safety. Truth is, power isn't inherited, it's reclaimed. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked out knowing one thing with absolute certainty. They took everything from me. And still, I became untouchable.